Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Today, I have for you a packed one. We have captaincy, and that too in some depth. We will be looking at the forwards in the exact manner that you need me to look them at. We will look at Haaland. We will look at why I'm so bullish on one particular asset and team, and a variety of other things, of course. 40% of you who watch regularly have not subscribed. So if you could please do so, that would be absolutely magnificent. I would really appreciate it. Just check if you have not done so already, as we approach 5,000 subscribers and we are quite close to hitting that feat. Without anything else needing to be said, let's hop into the video. Let us start with what is probably the most important decision for many of us this week, and that is where to place the armband and whom to give the responsibility to. Below, or in front of you, I have 9 options, which I think are probably the 9 best options, and all in their own right warranted some sense of discussion. Joao Pedro, Mbeumo, Bukayo, Saka, Cole Palmer, Nicholas Jackson, Bruno Fernandes, Heung-min Son, Mohamed Salah, and of course, Erling Haaland. So how do we decide? Well, of course, I'm going to go into the football analysis in just a little bit, but there is something a little bit different about these type of weeks. Usually, we are either presented with a standout captaincy option, example, Haaland at home to Ipswich in game week 2, or we're presented with 2/3 very, very, very good options. This week, given it's so close between so many people, I would not say we have any of those, right? I would not say there is a standout. Usually, we just need to look at the ceiling because the floor is already there. However, in a week like this, where there isn't that security attached with the captaincy, generally, your captaincy options almost certainly will have lower floors. And I actually think approaching it from that sense is a better approach for this type of week because you have very little safety and security compared to a normal week. So I'm really looking at assets that I can find reliable to at least generate me one turn, and I'm expectant of generating me one return. I'll give you an example and a slight spoiler. Son, for example, I have as the asset who has the lowest floor this week. So for me, there's no way I would captain him. Yeah, sure, with a player like him, with how Spurs are playing at the moment, the ceiling's there. But given his role, given that Fulham can put in a very good defensive performance, as we'll come on to, for me, he's got the lowest floor. So there's no way I'm willing to accept that risk when there are so many other options, especially ones with higher floors and probably higher ceilings as well. So I'm always going to be looking at what's the floor like for them this week and then going from there, given I don't have the initial safety and security that we're usually provided with. But now let's hop into the analysis for the 9 options and find out who's 1, 2, and 3. We will start with the 2 Chelsea boys. And prior to my locking of the wildcard, I did speak about how Nicholas Jackson, in particular, I maybe fancied him more for game week 13 as opposed to 12, given the stylistic suitability. I kind of knew Leicester were going to sit in, not to the extent they did, but I was expecting of it. Whereas Villa, we've seen repeatedly, are exploitable to that space in behind by physical, quick, strong strikers. And the fact that Jackson can also drop in and he's going to cause them problems in that sense because he's not just going to be so static like others have been, especially the ones that you associate with pace and power. Jackson can drop in, he'll run those channels consistently, he'll cause them a lot of problems. There's every reason as to why he could do really well this week, right? Also, having Cole Palmer feed him is a big deal. The other thing is, if there's no concert, if there's no Kamara, if there's no Onana, which we'll kind of find out tonight, given Villa play tonight against Juventus, that's a huge, huge plus because from what I've seen of a Diego Carlos, Pau Torres centre-back partnership, they're going to struggle, and they also won't have that protection in front, and that's particularly important when you've got the likes of Cole Palmer in the side. So I think Nicholas Jackson could do really well. However, I go back to what I spoke about initially when it comes to the criteria for my captaincy selection and how I'm looking at their floor far more than I usually am, right? And for me, Cole Palmer has one of the highest floors in the game. Set pieces, penalties, the volume of, I would say, shots in a game compared to other midfielders, especially creative ones, is significantly higher, even if it's tailed off in recent weeks. Penalties, as spoken about, and then just general level of involvement and quality, right? The only thing holding back Cole Palmer from being the number 1 selection this week is what I would say is his positioning, right? And it's what is he going to play and which role he's going to play and where is he going to do it. Against Leicester, we saw Enzo play, right? I just don't think he'll play Enzo again, even though he got man of the match, because he's spoken about how he prefers to have more defensive security and the base of Caicedo Lavia in these type of games. And honestly, I completely agree. So with that in mind, you assume Malagusta comes back into the side at right back, and Cucurella essentially instead of going as wide as he did last game and high up the pitch, he'll invert. Well, he won't invert. He'll just stay as part of the back 3, and Gusto will invert all the way into the right 8. So I do think we'll see Cole Palmer left centre mid again. That has certainly acted as a deterrent for his output, and that is something I think you must consider. That is the only negative, I would say, aside from the fact that Villa might have their injuries back. But even if they do, they've still shown themselves to be successful with conceding these certain type of chances, where I think the connection between Palmer and Jackson will certainly provide the grounds in which to exploit it. The other thing is, I don't particularly like the dynamic that Enzo poses for the Chelsea side in general, or Cole Palmer. I think he's more adverse to playing those almost just short type of passes into Palmer, those little fizzy ones. He wants to be looking for those longer switches, and naturally he's a deep lying playmaker, so don't blame him. But for me, whilst Cole Palmer is a good option, it does not come without its risk, given he might play this left centre mid role, and you can expect probably his ceiling to be somewhat capped as a result. I like Jackson, but I just don't think I trust it as much compared to Cole Palmer due to the fundamentals. But I like them both. And in terms of the ranking, we'll have that at the end. Now, Joao Pedro, look, it's arguably the best fixture this week, Southampton at home. We saw against Liverpool, even when Southampton play well, and even when they line up in a 5-4-1, they're so error-prone given the way they play. They've always got a mistake in them. You can transition on them with relative, and I mean relative, ease. You can also win the ball high against them given the way they play, and you can always profit in that sense. However, they still have a lot about them that I do like, and I don't think it's ever going to be the easiest fixture compared to what other promoted sides have shown in the past, right? Because they can play football. And against Liverpool, honestly, maybe they should have walked out there with a point. And if it wasn't for those mistakes, we'd have viewed the game completely differently. And I don't think a few moments from a few individual errors should take away from what was a good team performance. The other thing with Joao Pedro is, are you ever going to get 90? Are you going to get 90 this week? I don't think you are. And even if you do, it's a high risk to just assume that, right? Like, there's nothing really that's indicative of that fact. They've also got the spread of output between Matoma, Welbeck, and Ruta, but then obviously Minter off the bench, Ferguson off the bench. The fact that he plays 10 and not 9. So I think with all of that being factored in, and the fact that you haven't yet seen an explosive ceiling, the floor is probably pretty decent for him this game. But I don't think the ceiling's there to match. And whilst I spoke about the floor, I want both present, right? I'm just putting more emphasis on the floor this time. So for me, he wouldn't find his way into the top 3. Now let's move on to my 2 least favorite options, being Heung-min Son and Bruno Fernandes. I spoke about Son in the initial section when I was discussing criteria, right? 1, could he have reduced expected minutes? Absolutely. We saw an early hook against City. I think Ange is really managing his injury. He knows how important he is for this season. They don't want to lose him. And especially when they have depth in this squad, they certainly do. And other players are playing well enough to compete for his position. I think it makes a lot of sense just to not over-risk him in terms of minutes. So maybe reduce expected minutes. He also has the lowest floor, in my opinion, due to the ceiling. And Andrew Winger is never going to be one, well, not never, but it's very unlikely to be one that has the opportunity to return consistent hauls simply due to their positioning and their role. You've got Udogie entering that left half space and combining with him there and often running beyond. You've got the 9 really occupying that central zone. You've got Son being tasked with providing the width in general to stretch the opposition block and having but quite a big responsibility with small space combinations in the wide areas to essentially displace and move the block. So for that reason, I just don't think you can go here. And I think it's just so difficult to justify. I know some have spoken about it, but it's just not for me. The other thing is, okay, yeah, fine, Fulham just shipped 4 to Wolves, and they shipped 3 to Villa at home, but they can be very difficult to beat. We've seen that. And the other thing is, with them, I still don't rate the transitional threat too much outside of Adama Traore and Anthony Robinson. And with Adama not playing recently, or not being in favour, I don't think they'll be able to get up the pitch as quickly, and therefore I think that block will be somewhat settled. Obviously, if they miss Anderson, that's a big deal, and we'll find that out. But from a defensive standpoint, they can be one of the tougher sides to face, and they've got the physicality, which we've seen on a repeated basis, to make it difficult for opposition. To Bruno, whilst I like Son the least, Bruno's a close second in that regard, because what I saw against Ipswich, I thought was really poor from an FPL standpoint. Even with 2 runners in Garnacho and Rashford up top in the 3, he still didn't really manage to find them, and not through his fault, but mainly because United didn't have much of the ball. They were having to come so deep when they did get the ball because the press was quite lethargic and not aggressive. And it wasn't particularly high either. So there's that. And especially against Everton, okay, fine, he's going to feed 2 runners. But into what space? Because you know what you're going to get with Everton. You know you're going to get settled, deep block, small spaces, a lot of physicality to compete with. And if he's playing in this type of role, okay, and it doesn't go well for the first 45 minutes again, Okay, especially with this type of role, there's a certain type of player and type of profile you need in and around. Like for example, Mason Mount, available for those small space combinations, willing to drop in, can stretch at times, fairly fluid. And if he doesn't have that, I think he's going to be somewhat isolated, and he just won't have the support he needs. So for me, I wouldn't even mind selling him this week. That's how bearish I am on his and United's prospects this week. But for me, the conditions just aren't there. The other thing is, if it doesn't start well, does he drop back into the pivot like he did against Ipswich? Yeah, maybe, just to get on the ball more and just so he can feel the game more. And Amorim spoke about that in his post-match interview. So for me, just these two, absolute no-go. I'd actually happily sell Bruno, especially because 1 in 14, you want to go Bowen. Okay, fine. Maybe you want to go Bowen in 14, so you wait one more week. But if you wanted to go elsewhere as a 1-week punt, genuinely, I wouldn't mind it if you are in the equation. Brandon Mbeumo was a really, really interesting one. Obviously, people captain him, I believe it was for the Leicester fixture where he scored a brace. Some people, and good on them, right? The Ipswich fixture. No, the Southampton fixture. The Southampton fixture. Apologies. The only thing that is taken away from his prospects this week is I don't think Leicester can get any worse than what they showed against Chelsea. But are they to play a more aggressive style of football? Yeah, probably. That's one of the reasons Steve Cooper got sacked. It was more to do with the philosophy and how he aligned with the club, because from a league table standpoint and a point standpoint, he's actually doing pretty well. I mean, if you used to tell Leicester fans they wouldn't be in the relegation zone 12 games in, I think it's snap your hand off, especially with how much better the league's got. So from a point standpoint, they're doing pretty well. The only thing is, if they are to play more aggressive style, are they more susceptible to conceding more chances? I'm not sure, because they were conceding so many anyway, and they were putting such little emphasis on the attacking side of the game. That's the only thing. Maybe you could argue he's been playing wider recently, and in this 4-2-4, he's just not allowed to come into that central zones as much. He's not really functioning in any sense as a right forward. It really is a proper out-and-out right winger. And that's the only thing. However, with Brentford's record at home, with the fact that Leicester just aren't the best side, I do think he'll have some joy. He'll be in and around the top 3, as you'll see. But one thing with assets outside of the best teams is I'm always slightly skeptical to trust them, because I feel like they're more susceptible to a bad performance. Like, it's more likely that Brentford perform badly against Leicester than Chelsea, City, Arsenal, Liverpool would, right? And that's always something that I think you've got to take into account. Even if he has a good game, the players around him aren't of as good of a quality as the likes of like Palmer Jackson or Haaland, De Bruyne, etc., whereby they can almost help him and bail him out if need be. So that's that. Now we move on to the big man, Erling Haaland, and he has his own section later, which is actually quite an interesting macro level strategy discussion later. For me, this is a low floor game because, one, he's never performed too well historically against Liverpool. Why? Well, it's usually due to the centre-backs they have. They really make it difficult for him to find that space in behind. I think especially under Slot, it'll be even harder. He'll definitely go for not definitely, but I think he'll go for a reduced risk game model. I think they'll ensure that the space between all the players, as they've done throughout the season, is small, thereby making it more difficult for City to transition on them, so Haaland can't find that space. The line's a little bit deeper anyway. You've got Van Dijk and Konate to protect that space. The decision-making in general, I think, will be a little bit more risk-averse in terms of the passes. For example, Van Dijk stepped out against Southampton, lost the ball, and that's where the penalty was generated from, I believe, or a big chance. I don't think that will happen as much because it'll just, in general, be a lot safer. So for all of those reasons, on top of the fact that City's creative dynamics have not really been there so far, on top of the fact that in general their attacking dynamics haven't been too bad, like you see the amount of chances he's missed and City have missed, but they're not what they once were. And then they've obviously got those defensive issues in abundance, which we're going to talk about in the Salah section, which I think could just have a huge negative impact on the whole team. And morale drops, and if they're behind by a few, maybe they're just not in the zone to go and push on. So for me, I would say the floor's pretty low, the ceiling's pretty low. The one thing is he's Haaland, right? And it is City, and you never know. And he also has some space in behind in which to exploit. And, people respond differently to adversity. Maybe they come out all guns blazing and as a real statement to the rest of the league. I'm pretty sure if they win, they're only 5 points off the top anyway, which barely anything for them, especially at this stage in the season. So there's that factor. But I just think when there's other opportunities present and the fact that the floor is pretty low and you don't really know what you're going to get with City, you really don't know what you're going to get. For me, he wouldn't find himself in the top 3 and it would be an avoid. Now, it's probably no surprise to find that these two both find themselves in the top 3 alongside Cole Palmer, and I will have the rankings for you after I discuss them. We spoke about City and we touched on them there. Now let's talk about the game more as a whole from Liverpool's perspective. You do not know what you're going to get with Manchester City on Sunday. For me, Matthias Nunes has to play in the pivot. He has to play in midfield because I just think you need that robustness. I think you need that sense of physicality. I know Pep doesn't like playing in there, but just in my personal opinion, I think they have to play him there. Because I think if they go with Gundo Rico again in the middle, they're going to get eaten alive. Like, especially at Anfield, it's probably the worst place to do it, all things considered. Liverpool in transition would just be devastating, especially if City come onto them. For example, Spurs, at one instance in the last game, were building deep in their left corner. City go with a high man-to-man ball side press, right? And when I say ball side, for example, let's say the spare fullback all the way on the opposite touchline, they don't really cover that space too much, even by protecting the space as opposed to going to the man. They'll always just bring the man inside, always until the closest centre back, right? So it's really a ball side high press, and this is something that's coming into the game a little bit more, and managers are starting to speak about more, right? They get played through, and then they were devastating their Spurs on transition because City's midfielders, when you're pressing like that, as tweeted about it, you need a certain level of physicality to be able to recover and offset. If you are, or offset the negatives if you are played through. And without that, in terms of if they have Gundo Rico in the middle, I think Liverpool could destroy them and be absolutely devastating there. Okay. What solution does City have? Well, for me, there's not too many that are apparent. I spoke about playing a diamond in midfield and inverting Matthias Nunes all the way from like right back. But is he likely to do that? No. And do they have many solutions? No, because they don't really have a Rodri replacement, right? In terms of the profile, in terms of the physicality either. So, like, I would definitely say Liverpool are the favourites. There's a couple things. Can City keep... If City can keep the ball for a lot of the game, it will massively, massively reduce Salah's ceiling, because then it becomes a moment type of game, right? But I just wonder if they can do that with their form and the fact that it will be a cauldron in there, especially for the first 15, 20 minutes where they'll get rattled, okay? From Salah's side, obviously the best Big Six game player we've probably ever seen, always turns up in these games. He's never faced a weaker Manchester City side. He's arguably in his best form ever. So all of that's going for him. The one thing is, it's still Pep. It's still City. The name does carry weight, and it's just, is the floor present? And that's the thing for me. I just wonder, is the floor still present, even because it is Manchester City, right? It is without doubt a harder game. It's just if you can find a solution for the midfield. I actually don't think going forward it's too big of a threat, because too big of a deal, because they've been missing a lot of chances, right? So that will eventually have a regression to the mean, and they won't be so bad. The other thing is they have enough talent in there in moments across that front line, Grealish, Savio, Foden, De Bruyne, Haaland, to just hurt you or hurt anyone. So I think from an attacking sense, they're fine. It's just whether they can really shore up at the back. And I think the Feyenoord will be a real, like the Feyenoord result last night, will be a real slap in the face to essentially make a move to a slightly more defensive system, whereby I just don't think he wants to get thrashed, because that could be embarrassing. And if he goes with his usual type, it's on the cards, right? Like losing 4-0 to Spurs, conceding 3 late to Feyenoord, and then getting thrashed by Liverpool would probably be an all-time low, if this is not already an all-time low. So for me, he's absolutely in the conversation, given all of the obvious reasons we've spoken about. However, I do think you have to accept the risk that it's still Manchester City. Bukayo Saka, there's a lot I like about it, right? I think the counter-argument will be, one, it's a low block, but I would say that the low block wasn't as good as it was made out to be. I think Newcastle lacked the creative dynamics given their set of 8s to essentially exploit that, and they've kind of shown that throughout the season, whereas Arsenal do not, with Urian Timber, with Martin Odegaard, with Bukayo Saka, all on that right side functioning in such a fluid manner, and the level of creativity and dynamism they provide. The only other thing for Saka is, do you trust him and his ceiling? Whereas with Salah, I would say the floor is probably more of an issue here. He's always got the ceiling, right? You always know how devastating he can be, but it's just, can City have a very good game? With Saka, you're probably more concerned about the ceiling. I'm not sure if he's ever got a Premier League hat-trick. He doesn't haul as much or haul as big as some of the other boys in terms of Salah and Palmer. And that's what you're always worried about, right? And we spoke about this in terms of the captaincy in game week 7 as well. I would say it's accessible. Whether it's as safe as a Salah ceiling, I would say not. So I think they're quite opposites in a sense. However, I do think the ceiling slightly more accessible due to the fact that Urian Timber's coming to the side, and we have a whole section on Arsenal later, which I will speak about more. And I certainly do think that helps. So now let's get on to the top 3 in the ranking. So this is what I've arrived at with my top 3. Now I must say Brian Mbeumo was a close 4th. But for me, everyone else didn't really get too much of a look in. I've gone Saka 1, Palmer 2, Salah 3. Salah is predominantly for the floor and the fact that I spoke about that being my main criteria earlier, and not too much outside of that. Of course, there's all the things present that we spoke about, but I still think the Manchester City name and the quality they've got in the side carries weight, and I'm not just going to disregard that due to a bad run of form. I'm going to trust Pep to find a solution for that midfield on Sunday and essentially proceed from there. I would say, however, I'm not locked, and it's still very close. I have Palmer second, mainly due to the change in positioning. Whereas Saka, he probably has a slight change in positioning where he can come inside a little bit more because Yuri and Timber can overlap, and he didn't really have that too much in Ben White before because he's so explosive. And I think in terms of Saka's positioning and overall role, he has a little bit more freedom to generate some more output because of what he can do on the pitch now, and he's not so shackled to the touchline. So for me, that's the order. I also think West Ham are the weakest side out of the three, so it's a nice thing to bet on there. But it's quite close and potentially subject to change. A subject which is increasing in popularity is the sale of Brian Mbeumo in game week 14. So here, I'm going to discuss whether you should or shouldn't be selling, and if you should be doing so, who are the potential replacements and which is the best one. So for me, this is a sell, and I think this is quite a clear sell. In game week 13, some people have discussed selling him as a facilitator for another asset. I wouldn't be doing that in most cases. In some cases, if you're like super bullish on a Palmer captaincy and the only way to get that is by taking Mbeumo out because it unblocks a midfield spot, yeah, okay, I can understand that to an extent, especially given he hasn't been as good in recent weeks as he was during the patch where you all owned him. So yeah, I don't mind it in that spot, but in most cases, I think this is absolutely a Gaming 14 sell. Why? Well, in Brentford's 4-2-4, he is playing quite wide, and traditionally, and in this case, it just isn't really that good for wingers. A lot of your actions are more creatively orientated. They include small space nations on the right side. You're going to come inside less, so your opportunities to shoot are reduced, and therefore your opportunities to score are reduced. Also, not only the quality of the opportunity, but also the volume of opportunity, right? You have to function in such a different type of role. Even if one of the midfielders is to push in, it's normally you who provides the width, right? Because who else is going to provide the width, especially when you don't have a right back that overlaps? It's not like you have Lewis Potter, a wing back, on the other side. So there's all of that. Then let's look at the fixtures. It's Villa, Newcastle, Chelsea, Nottingham Forest, Brighton, Arsenal. That is horrible, right? Okay, fine, Villa have shown themselves to definitely not be the best defense in the world, but it's still away, okay, and Brentford are traditionally much, much better at home, and it's still not a good fixture, I would say. Newcastle, again, difficult. Chelsea, difficult. Forest, one of the better defenses in the league this year. Brighton, it's Brighton away, and that's the thing, like, Chelsea, Villa, and Brighton have all shown themselves defensively to be a bit, at times, but those are the three away ones. And then you have Forest at home, which is a very solid defense. Arsenal at home, which is a very solid defense. And Newcastle, which can be a fairly solid defense as well. So for me, this has to go, especially when you consider the ceiling. Because what is his realistic ceiling in the game? Are you expecting of Haaland? And no, probably not. And why should you be, given the difficulty in the fixture run? Whereas, if you move on to someone like Jared Bowen, with like Leicester, and then Bournemouth, and then Southampton, and Brighton and Wolves, with that set of fixtures, yeah, you are somewhat expecting of a haul. And you also say 0.5. He has all the fundamentals nailed down, similar to Mbeumo, but arguably positioning much better. He probably won't have penalties because Paquetá will be on the pitch. But aside from that, fundamentally, very, very sound. And he's got the better fixtures, right? And he's cheaper. He unlocks 0.5 to maybe upgrade in defense to go to like a Yuri and Timber, as we will speak about. So for me, he is the standout option. I don't know why you would personally look elsewhere. The only reason you may not go there is if you need someone cheaper to facilitate another move elsewhere, or you need this midfield spot as a facilitator for one of the premiums, which you do not have, like a Saka, like a Palmer, like a Salah. The other replacements people are speaking about, Gordon, I just don't think Newcastle have really hit their stride. I think that when they've come up against deeper block structures, not only is he susceptible to getting hooked, but they've also had their problems given the dynamics in the side, specifically the 8. So that's one thing. And just in general, given he's been playing on the right a lot, the transitional threat that he carries on the left is nowhere near the same, thus reducing his output. Bruno, expensive, and the fixtures turn. And he looked really, really poor from an FPL standpoint under Amarin. So that's that. Odegaard, expensive. The other thing is he helps a lot in the second phase. Yeah, fine, he might improve Arsenal, but from an FPL standpoint, are you expecting a lot of goals when he's not functioning as this high-volume shooter in and around the box? No, you're not. So, absolute no-go for me. We'll come on to Matoma in a second. Kulusevski and Matoma, I don't mind them as much, right? Because they are cheaper, so at least you get to use the money elsewhere. At least Kulusevski has been brilliant for minutes. At least he's got okay fixtures, but when Bone exists at a little bit more, but for sure. But with so much more going for him, I would go there. Albeit, I don't think Kulusevski is the worst move in the world. I do think you are accepting a somewhat limited ceiling, which I never really want to do either. And then Mitoma, they've got great fixtures, and for expected minutes, he's been really good. And to be fair, there's one attacking position out of the 4 that doesn't have as much competition. It would be that left side. Maybe the 10 as well, because Joao Pedro is just his now. But Mitoma would definitely be a close second in that case. However, for me, this season, he hasn't been as good. I think returning from his injury, he's looked a little bit off it. And he's always one player that I've slightly questioned with regards to output, specifically goals. I don't think you're expectant of him to, brace in any game. He's not got the most lethal finishing either. So for all of those reasons, I think Bowen is by far the standout option. And I'm not even going to recommend a second one. Because I think if you're going to go elsewhere from Bowen, I'd rather do it resulting in a strategy as opposed to personnel selection. I spoke about this in transfer plans, how I was bullish on Bukayo, and I think you needed to start to devise a plan to getting him in. And I am becoming really, really bullish on Bukayo. I was surprised at how Yuri and Timber was the one who pushed on instead of Calafiori, given what Arteta had done, for example, against PSG, where Calafiori definitely pushed up into that left half space, into those central areas, and he wandered quite far. But it seems now it's quite set that Calafiori will tuck in a little bit and Timber will be the one going forward at an increased frequency. And that too, not just underlapping, whereby tucking in, but also overlapping, allowing Saka to come inside. And he's got the dynamism, he's got the physical profile in which to be able to do that. Okay, that's big for Saka. He has been shackled to the touchline for so long. He's been provided with conditions in a similar way to Martinelli. Nowhere near as bad, but in a similar way, whereby they're just not optimal for him. He hasn't had the support. He has functioned as the support. And now that's changing. Now you've got more of a creative in Martin Odegaard next to him, who will also do his second phase work so he doesn't have to drop deep to help progression. You've got Timber, who will allow him to push him inside, but even if he is the one to be underlapping, at least he provides Saka with more of an opportunity just to, slip someone in and then he can come for the cutback. That's something you'll probably see a bit more and more. I think you'll see Arsenal score from a cutback on that right-hand side. You've got the general level of quality combinations. You've got the fact that the angles open up now so much more because you've got an extra man, and that's what I think that numerical superiority provides you. You've also got the fact that Timber can operate at a variety of little pockets and spaces close to him. So you've got a lot, right? You've got a lot. The other thing is Timber's so good one-on-one defensively. There was a little clip actually in the Sporting game where he told Saka, you go, leave me alone because I can handle this. And if Saka has to track back less, especially on transition, which is probably something you haven't seen Saka generate output from as much given the role he's playing, wow, he becomes so devastating. And you're getting all of that at 10.1 million, okay? 10.1 million. Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing is the next 6 fixtures, every single one of them I expect to be a deep block. Now, I probably should be able to do this, but I can't rattle off the 6 in a row at the moment. It includes something like Fulham. No, it's like West Ham, Man United, Fulham, Ipswich, Palace, and Everton. I think it's that, right? Either way, when I looked at it, it was 6 deep blocks. With Odegaard and with Timber, he's not just going to be shackled as a touchline. It's much harder to double up on him because you have to account for Timber now as well. And he's, like I said, is a huge, huge difference for him. And then obviously you've got Odegaard functioning as an interior as well. So we've got all of that, okay? And therefore, I think he's going to have so much of the ball. A lot of it just runs through him anyway. It used to. It still will continue to do so. So the volume of actions will be so high. And therefore, the returns, especially the floor, will always, always, always be there. And then on top of that, he's world-class, right? So for me, at 10.1, I don't really see how you can go without, especially given how the structure of the game is and you don't really need Haaland, as we're going to come on to. I think I've sung his praises enough. So for me, I'm bullish on Bukayo. And if you're not going there, I just think it could be a bit of a long day, especially during the Christmas period. Like the fundamentals, right? He had literally all of them. He probably didn't have the positioning to an extent, but that's just improving more and more and more. So yeah, I don't really know how much more I can sell it to you. Time for Timber, I like it. At 5.5, the thing is with Arteta, okay, yeah, fine, Timber is certainly prone to injury more than other players, but Arteta has shown an unwillingness to rotate, especially in his backline. Like we repeatedly see the same backline when it's settled. Timber, Calafiori, Saliba, Gabriel, Raya is a serious unit. And especially with the role he's playing and how integral he is to the side now, I think you could see a run of games from Timber. He obviously comes in cheaper than Saliba. He comes in at the same price as Raya, but doesn't block the 4.5 million goalkeeper slot. He provides you a clean sheet probability that no other defense does, simultaneously whilst providing you a price and attacking output that no one else does in the game, right? Even Gabriel's 6. So for me, brilliant option. Expected minutes is your only concern, but like I say, I think they'll be okay. and I only have good things to say about these assets, and I would be all over an Arsenal triple up, to be quite honest with you. If I could, Gabriel, Timber, Saka, and, just have fun. The thing is, Saka to Gabriel is a combination you can access through set pieces, especially if Marino's not there. And then the other thing, Saka, Timber in open play is another combination you can access. Even Timber from set pieces through Saka is something you can access. So when you hit, you could hit really big. And for those reasons, I think this is a bit of a slam dunk and a nice differential opportunity. You should have seen in my transfer plan section the initial idea to acquire Erling Haaland for 18 and to captain him in some of the weeks thereafter and then sell him afterwards. However, I am shifting my perspective to a potential strategy where Erling Haaland or no Haaland becomes permanent, and I just use my free transfers very aggressively. I essentially keep 2 in the bank at all time, and then by rolling initially, and then I just go very aggressive week on week targeting fixtures because I'm never really looking to change structure. Why have I potentially opened myself up to this? Well, there's 3 reasons. One, the Premier League has never, ever seen this level of centre-forward talent across the league, which means I have so many exit routes, okay? I probably will forget some, but here we go. Johan Wissa, Chris Wood, Matthias Cunha, Liam Delap, Dominic Solanke, Nicholas Jackson, Ollie Watkins, Alexander Isak, Kai Havertz, and I could probably go on, right? I've almost definitely forgot someone. That's half the league. That literally is half the league. And all of the players I mentioned are not only very good players, but they have good conditions in which to thrive in on the most part, and they're all at very affordable prices, okay? That is a huge thing. The second thing is Fantasy Premier League has never seen the centre forwards present themselves as such good value, given their price tags, not just in an absolute sense, but particularly a relative sense, in comparison to Erling Haaland specifically, right? Like Nicholas Jackson, who looks on absolute fire at the moment, is at 8 million, and he started at 7.5, which is half of Haaland. Even Isak, one of the top strikers in the league, is started at 8.5, and Haaland started at 15. Now, is there a 6.5 million price difference gap in real life between them? And I'm not talking about the actual transfer market value. I'm talking about if you were to scale it up in terms of proportions. No, there's not between Isak and Haaland, right? If you put Isak in that City side, his output, the strike output, isn't going to drop by somewhat around 50%. Okay, it'll drop, but just not by 50%. Okay, so we're getting excellent value within the game. Okay, and never have centre forwards had conditions in which to thrive in as good as they do now because of the shift in the philosophy of Premier League managers, right? And obviously, we've spoken about how the attacking quality in the league's better. But because of this shift, there's not really bad fixtures from an attacking standpoint. There's not many good fixtures from a defensive standpoint. But there's just not many bad ones from an attacking standpoint because everyone wants to play just that little bit more outside of pretty much Nuno and Steve Cooper. And Steve Cooper's just got the sack, right? So there's all of that. And therefore, they can continue to present brilliant value and score goals throughout the season. Given there's so many of them, you can hop on, hop off. There's exit routes available. They're all in and around the same price tag. There's so many cheap ones available. So from that side, it's great. The only 2 things which I would say can offset this strategy is, number one, if the cheap forwards, for example, Wissa, Wood, Van Lissen, who I didn't even mention, they start to do really well, or at least matching the mid-price forwards in Cunha, Jackson, Isak, Watkins, Havertz, if they all can basically match them and make this category null and void, then okay, fine. Then we can start to talk about facilitating Haaland through those. But the likelihood of that happening, I think now at least, especially given that we've passed the early stage of the season, and we're in the Christmas period where you need more fundamentals and having the bigger strikers from better teams is more helpful. Well, I think that's unlikely. And the second thing is if Haaland presents himself to be such a superior captaincy option to all his relative contenders. But with the way Salah's playing, with the fact that we can be more aggressive and target certain fixtures, and the fact we've also got Palmer and Saka, and the fact that there are so many other captaincy options, the fact that City's dynamics are so far away from being optimal that you never really expect Haaland to have an optimal set of conditions at the moment, means that his likelihood in superiority of captaincy is unlikely, even by the time we get to game week 18 and the fixtures are better, right? You'd also have to forego so much and have a far more facilitating squad, right? And Haaland would really have to blow the rest of them out the water, right? It's not just about him doing good, it's about the rest of them doing bad. And there's so many of them that I think it's just hard for him to basically do that much better than the rest. So for me, I'm certainly considering just abandoning Haaland as a strategy in 18, committing to it early, and then going really aggressive. And you know what? let's say I go really aggressive early. It can't really go too bad for me because it's not like I'll be taking hits. I'm just targeting fixtures. I arrive at 18 with 1 free transfer or 2 free transfers, and I don't have Haaland and everyone wants to bring him back in. Maybe it would have gone so well for me that my investment will have paid off by a mile already, and I can just use hits to bring him back in. No biggie, right? I'll still be in significant profit and better off compared to the field. So this is a strategy I'm opening myself up to, and something I think maybe you guys should consider, and at a bare minimum would make the game a lot more fun. To finish, what seems like an ever-present section, given the volume of good options, as we've just spoken about, in this category, and that is the forwards. 2 people in particular that people are looking to buy, and we're going to discuss the exit routes for them, which is Joao Pedro and Matthias Cunha, for slightly different reasons. Cunha also because of form. Obviously, Joao Pedro picked up some form given back-to-back hauls, but also the stellar fixture in Southampton at home in relative terms. What I would say is the exit routes that I've seen are the ones listed on screen. Isak, Wissa, and Wood. And I do not think they're anywhere near as bad as people are making them out to be, and I don't think the gap's as big as it's being made out to be. I mean, Wood's been on fire this season, and as Ipswich at home, you have to remember there was no Morgan Gibbs-White behind him. He didn't even start. It was after the international break. There was no Elliot Anderson either, and it was Arsenal away, right? So I don't think you can be too harsh in your analysis of him there. Wissa could have had points against Everton, absolutely could have, and now he has Leicester at home and has been on fire this season. And Isak absolutely could have had points against West Ham as well, and he's been in good form and is just a top striker. So none of these guys are bad, and I don't think any of them are essential sells, especially when the fixtures are concerned. Isak I'm more open to due to the price tag, but that's an entire discussion. It's an entire different discussion, right? Joao Pedro, I would say, is slightly different to Cunha. Joao Pedro is now like 5'6", Cunha is now like 7. The price difference is huge, like 1.4, right? Where Cunha might even require some surgery to go up from like a Wood or a Wissa. Joao Pedro is literally just a downgrade in terms of price. So you can use the cash elsewhere. So I think they're completely different. I think Joao Pedro's also got the better fixture this week. And like I said, he's a lot cheaper. So I'm far more on board with that one. Cunha, whilst I like it a lot this week, especially due to the fact that against Bournemouth, it's the central players who have the best prospects. I still think Bournemouth are a better side than Wolves, and thus I'm going to be somewhat cautious in suggesting that Cunha is now all of a sudden the best asset to bring in for this week in particular. The last point I'd like to make about Joao Pedro is whilst he's good and whilst he's preferable for this week, and I've already established the fact that you've got good options elsewhere, Southampton, if they didn't make those diabolical errors, probably would have got a result against Liverpool, and we'd be looking at this fixture far different, right? Yes, they do have those errors in them, so I must account for them. But there is also the possibility that they simply eradicate them because they shouldn't be making these type of mistakes at this level, at this frequency. And if they don't, they become a lot harder to score against. So whilst I think it's good, I don't think it's unbelievable and as good as maybe people are making out to be, nor do I think the difference is as big as people are making out to be. Last point on Cunha, I personally am looking at him for 16, from 16. I don't think Everton away in 14 is great, and even if West Ham set up in a lower block and they do quite well at that in 15, that could be somewhat difficult for Cunha. So mainly Wolves as opposed to Cunha. So that's that. Moving on to Nicholas Jackson. I just wanted to talk about him. I think he's undoubtedly a top 3 forward in the game now when everything is considered. Most people don't have him. The stylistic suitability of the fixtures for the long run are brilliant. Even on the FDR, they just look great. I'm not concerned about him getting dropped for Nkunku because even in the Christmas period, because he's playing so well and he offers a completely different skill set to Nkunku. Plus, when Nkunku's had his cameos, I have not been impressed one bit. Sure, he's on 4 yellow cards, but like realistically, he doesn't ever need to get a yellow card. I imagine Maresca would have told him to zip it and stop doing so many stupid things to get them. And if he gets suspended, so be it. Like most of us have depth in our squads anyway. So yeah. So for me, someone that you really should be looking at, especially if you fancy a differential. And I thought I'd just point that out yet again, because after all, he is tier 1.5. And that is all she wrote for today, ladies and gentlemen. If you did enjoy the video, please do like it. We've been getting a lot of love on the channel recently, and for that, I am very appreciative. So thank you very much. I've got something very, very, very exciting coming for a portion of you quite soon. So stay tuned for that. And I assure you, some of you will absolutely love it because you have been asking for it. Not much else needs to be said. We will, of course, have the team selection video for tomorrow. Leave your comments in the questions. Leave your questions in the comments. I will, of course, answer them. And do subscribe if you haven't already as we push for 5,000 subscribers. A feat I hope we can hit very, very soon. Have a brilliant day, and I shall see you tomorrow.